Hello, welcome to HLA Live. HLA Live is our regular broadcast on the HLA YouTube channel as well as all the other social media channels. Each week we talk to interesting people from across the HLA community.
Good evening, everyone. I am really excited to be chairing tonight's meeting.
Hi, I'm Rosie Spooner and I'm hosting HLA Live this Wednesday.
And I'm an HLA scholar and I'm also going to be your host this evening.
To share with us their ideas and their innovations and hopefully bring them to a global audience.
Quite quick, we have ideas, let's do this, let's do that. So
many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have.
Hello everyone and welcome to the HLA Live session on widening participation in the postgraduate realm.
Homelessness and health.
Addiction and the new normal.
HLA programs are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur. The leader is a communicator. The leader is a manager. The leader as a negotiator. The leader as a follower. And the leader as a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty. Episode 48 of HLA Live features Zach Hassan in a conversation with the BBC's top doctor, Dr. Clare Fernandes.
On this episode of HLA Live, we're focusing on some of the more novel and exciting places that a medical degree can take you and your career. And who better to talk to us about that than the BBC's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Clare Fernandes. Welcome, Clare.
Thanks, Zach.
I'm really interested to know about what it's like being the BBC's Chief Medical Officer. What does your day-to-day work involve? Can you give us a flavour of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a non-clinical role, and I use my medical knowledge to shape policy and process. So a very obvious example at the moment is COVID. So I sit on a team that lead our COVID strategy, lead our kind of outbreak management, and is the point of liaison with other organisations such as Public Health England and other broadcasting companies and their CMOs to have a quite joined up approach to novel things like productions and EastEnders and Strictly, and how we go about filming during these difficult times, but also how we keep all our other employees safe who might be stationed abroad or working in war zones or working in the office. But then the other things that I would do outside of COVID would be things like shaping a mental health policy, a menopause policy, looking at areas in which we have groups of workers with particular health problems or sickness absence, and working with HR and the teams to create a productive workforce, a happy and healthy workforce.
So there's a whole variety of issues that you're working on, basically responsible for, all aspects of, employees' working lives at the BBC. I'm interested to know about how you go about actually doing something about those issues. Are you in a lot of meetings? What kind of, are you looking at data? Just give us a little bit of kind of what you might spend each day doing.
Yeah, so there is a lot of meetings compared to, so I also do a clinical role one day a week because, I feel that that's really important to me too. And the big thing between, when I'm in practice and when I'm at the BBC is the volume of meetings. So when I first started, I did honestly think, how does anybody get anything done? Because you go from meeting to meeting, and where does the work get done? So there's a lot of meeting with different key stakeholders, so HR, with our international teams, with our workplace, so our kind of engineers that work on ventilation, with our unions, and with different other teams, depending on what exactly I'm doing. So lots of meetings, lots of liaison with employees and their representatives as a day-to-day.
I see. So what's your favorite bit of what you're working on? Do lots of these different issues, do any of them jump out as particularly exciting for you?
I don't know if exciting is the right word, but I do. So at the moment, I've been doing lots of health promotion. So over COVID, there's been a need. So I cover 22,000 employees across the globe, and those employees range from the LA to Afghanistan to India, for example. So there's a whole lot of different health literacy within some of those populations, because not only does their populace include broadcasters and journalists, but also involves security guards and cleaners, of which, of course, even within the UK, there might be a wide variety of knowledge about COVID and health in general. So what I truly like, I do actually think it's exciting, but everyone's idea of exciting is a bit different, is I really like when I get to speak to, so for example, my work is in Kazakhstan or Afghanistan or Nepal with an interpreter, talking about what COVID is, talking about the things that sometimes we take for granted in terms of like hand space and space, and the simple strategies to help with health promotion. So what to do if you're ill, what to do if someone at home is ill, and things like self-isolation, and those simple things that I think are just so incredibly important. That's probably my favourite thing. The other thing I quite like doing, which is very, very novel to my kind of role, is working with productions. So it's something I've never done before. It's something that people see as being quite glamorous. It's not particularly glamorous, but it is a real stretch of my mind and how we use our medical knowledge. So, for example, Top Gear, I worked with the safety team to look at how we keep them at 2 meters when they're doing their crazy stuff. So I think there was one time they had an ice cream truck and they're going across England in the truck, and they had to modify the vehicle to make it COVID secure. So we looked at, okay, how do we practically do that? Or working with the lighting designers. So they use haze, which I didn't know is a way of creating depth really in a studio. So making it look bigger than it is, making the dancers look different and creating that illusion. And they came to me and said, well, can we use haze? And to my response, I don't know what haze is. So, a lot of work goes into that, and looking at, okay, well, it's an oil-based solution and this is what they use it for and this is how it works in the air, and just kind of extrapolating what I know about COVID to what I'm learning about these techniques to help them continue in their work and be safe. So that's pretty cool. I like that.
So you've given us a flavour of kind of what kind of situations people are coming to you with. Is it usually sort of completely fresh stuff that, maybe nobody's asked that question before, and you've got to be the person that kind of, starts from first principles of what should we do about this?
No, not really. So whilst those are the exciting bits, there is a lot of the day-to-day. I think we have that in all our medical careers. There's a few bits and pieces that are really novel, but if everything was novel, perhaps we wouldn't be able to cope. There is a lot of day-to-day things in terms of queries around working practice, or having to deal with employees that have queries about how we're doing things. At the moment we're doing some health promotion within the nations about what the new variant might mean for our working practices, and also kind of planning of productions going forward, or planning of news stories going forward, but also planning of offices going forward. So there's a lot of kind of day-to-day stuff which is very, very routine, as with everybody's job, but it's still just as important, but perhaps just not as exciting.
I think if I was even getting to get asked some questions by the Top Gear team, I think that would balance out the routine stuff for myself anyway. So I'm interested to know as because you're kind of in a leadership position at the BBC, and I wonder how much scope do you have for improving people's health more sort of generally? You've maybe suggested that you've got an international reach in terms of that health promotion stuff, but I wonder what other kinds of issues that you're trying to address and how you're kind of approaching the organizational improvement side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, COVID is all encompassing, but I think, the thing about COVID is it really does identify health inequity, and that's within any group of people, regardless of whether they're abroad or in the UK. And that's something that's really, really important to me. So how we go about doing that, I think, so the vaccination scheme is probably a good example of how we're going about that or how I'm doing that at the moment for COVID, which is again looking at our different groups of people and answering questions and helping them to make a decision for themselves, but specifically without discrimination or targeting, but acknowledging that certain groups are more at risk. So we've got lots of employee groups within the BBC, such as Ability or Embrace, that have kind of an ethnic minority component, or and going to them and saying, okay, can we do more for you right now, to acknowledge that there is a difference between communities, and also going to some of our other third party staff, such as our cleaners and our security guards that may have a different makeup and may be more at risk, and saying, do you want this information as well, to try and empower, because I think that's really powerful when you're in an organisation to do so. But I think outside of COVID, the way that I will go about that is using some of the data on sickness absence, using some of the data that we have on pockets of problems within our workforce, and just in terms of things like work-related stress, or general things like, do we have a problem with people going off sick with cardiovascular problems here, there, and then targeting some of our resources. So one of the things as an employer that I'm quite privileged to be a part of is we've got a GP service, a private GP service. We've got health kiosks that do blood pressure and do kind of know your numbers type scenarios. And how do we use those better? How do we take that data and inform our staff so that they're empowered to make their own choices and live healthier? All the way down to the food that we serve in the canteen. We have a kind of healthy eating policy. We have those sorts of things. We have kind of fitness goals for our staff that we then want to empower them to embrace, really.
Are you getting to write some of those policies? I'm getting the sense that you're in a position where you really can change things if you want to, whereas I think especially as a junior doctor, but doctors at all stages in the NHS, trying to change things for the better can be extremely difficult sometimes, even if you've got a really good idea.
Yes.
Do you think you're in a position you can make things happen?
I think I'm in an incredibly privileged position to help make things happen, but I definitely emphasise help, because it's not just me. So I work with safety, I work with HR, I work with the executives, I work with employee groups, and so I listen to the concerns from every side to help make those changes. But I think I'm in an incredibly privileged position where I'm the only paid doctor within this company to give medical advice, and so therefore I'm in a very lovely position where if I say something, people will take it on board and understand that importance. Whether they go ahead is sometimes the difference between a clinical decision and a business decision. Their priorities can be slightly different, but I am there stick my oar in and say, hang on a second, this is what I think is the good thing to do, and this is where I think it benefits our employees. I'm really there, as a kind of employee / patient advocate.
You mentioned a little bit about mental health and sort of workplace related stress, and I'm interested in this, especially at somewhere like the BBC, because we've heard in the news about mental stress of being a celebrity, is quite a lot. I'm just wondering, if without going into any specifics, how are you thinking about what an organization like the BBC might be able to do about those kinds of problems, and just organizations more generally?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always a difficult one. Now, things that we do within the BBC. So I think the BBC is like any organisation. So we know that occupationally, mental health is the biggest challenge for employees and employers, and second to that is musculoskeletal disease. And the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, keeps statistics on that. And so it's always a challenge for employers and employees, which can lead to a real burden of ill health. So I think that within every organisation, it's important to have a policy or, a statement of commitment, but also a strategy to meet that. And partly that comes from looking at stresses within a workplace, but also stresses within daily life, because work and home, as doctors, we all know this, work and home, the lines can become blurred if you're working all the time. And it's same for our employees too. There are some obvious stresses as well that perhaps would be more unique to broadcasting, because we deploy people to war zones, like pretty stressful. You don't need to be a doctor to know that that's going to be pretty stressful. But also, if you think about employees, and this relates to doctors also, some groups of employees we know have perfectionistic characteristics that are more likely to lead to certain mental health conditions. There's different groups of people that have different risks, and perhaps being a celebrity is one of those. So it's important for us to look at all our workforce, because it includes the celebrities as well as Joe Blogs like me that on a desk, bum on a seat, but also then people that contribute to our shows. So we've got to think about things like children in need and how that might affect the people that take part, but also our radio stations and people that take part in shows about their experiences. How does it affect them? So it's kind of a very broad reaching scope of mental health that we look at.
I'm very interested to know a little bit more about how you might support those journalists who are going into war zones. I mean, how involved are you with those kinds of people, and what kind of things are you offering in terms of support?
Yes, so we're incredibly lucky to have a trauma specialist and a team that deals specifically with trauma. So some of them are, have trauma experience from being deployed or their previous work experience, and some of them are news gatherers. So we've got a very experienced multidisciplinary type team, and they have a very comprehensive system of pre-deployment, post-deployment, during deployment type plan. And we also have external support from a very experienced psychiatrist and his team, who deals specifically with trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, and we have a pathway that puts people through that as needed. So it's a very kind of a multidisciplinary, with a pathway, with external specialist support. So my input is quite limited, mainly because my specialty is occupational medicine, so I'm not necessarily best placed to do anything specific other than take a higher level view. So for example, if we did have a major problem and we could see that from a kind of high level view, we're obviously not doing something right, and then I would work with the team to change that, but would very much be a light touch on that because of they're better placed and they're, you know, more specialists to do so.
Yeah. You know, it's such a range of, you know, differences to working in a traditional NHS job, but also like a lot of similarities as well. Another similarity is that it's been dominated by COVID recently. And I wonder, you know, things are starting to open up now, especially in England. Are you seeing that kind of work start to come to an end? Is it starting to round off, or is it just as much as it's ever been?
Yeah, so it's different from the beginning, because the beginning everything was new, and you know, I was working a lot on speculation and hypothesis, so there's quite a lot of work around, well, how do we make best judgments, and then, you know, individual lockdowns happen, and because we have so many regional offices, again, it was sort of working to have a plan on, well, how do we work. So for example, can we have journalists going to hospital? What work is necessary? So can we then use contributors who are clinically extremely vulnerable or clinically vulnerable? Those sorts of decisions on a national level and a local level. But then also abroad, so India at the moment has kept me very busy in terms of, well, how do we best support our teams out there? And again, different places around the world can do that also. So it's kind of been quite a steady stream of work. It's been rather never-ending, if you like. Of course, it's been very different to our colleagues, like such as yourself in the hospital. And I never want to put my workload in the same bracket as yours, because actually you guys have been non-stop throughout in various very serious situations, whereas for me, some of it's pattern recognition and how can we make processes to make things different for different people. How do we look at how lockdown works? How do we look at withdrawing our NPIs abroad where there's no guidance? How do we look at staying consistent across our countries? So there's a lot of planning involved, and then implementation that hasn't ended.
Mm-hmm. Something that I wanted to ask about. So at some point you had to make the decision, you know, am I going to continue in hospital medicine, or am I going to leave and do something else? And this is a dilemma that I think faces many people who are working in the NHS at the moment. Maybe they'd like to, you know, have a bit more of a broader role or remit, and, you know, while keeping some of the clinical stuff as well. Do you remember that as something that was a dilemma for you? And, you know, I just wonder if you can tell us how you think about that now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really resonate with what you just said. So my career has been very long-winded, to the point that in my last post, my boss, who was amazing, said to me, "Do you actually want to be a doctor?" To which I said, "I do. I just don't know what flavour of doctor I want to be yet." So I went through, you know, a kind of very traditional route. A-levels, med school, F1, F2, thought I wanted to be an interventional radiologist from about F1, started radiology training straight after F2, and really didn't like it. And I was very much an odd duck, because I had 4 wonderful STs that worked with me, 3 STs that worked with me, and they all really liked it. All my consultant colleagues and registrars loved their job, and I thought, hang on a second, I'm different. I stuck with it for a bit. I loved the intervention. I really liked working with my hands. The other bits, it just didn't fulfill me.
That must have been quite hard.
It was really hard. So I stayed till ST2, and I spent a lot of time talking to my partner and my parents about what I should do. My parents advised me to stick with radiology, and my partner said, who's not a medic, said, I think you should leave because it was making me quite unhappy. So when I handed in my notice, I called HR and said, how do I go about doing this? And they said, well, we don't know, nobody's done it before. So yeah,
so that wasn't encouraging.
I felt like it was a huge decision for me, but it was a life-changing decision for me. I felt that I was very much on my own. I did have very good support from the kind of careers unit, but I did feel very much like I was on my own, and that I was taking a path that no one had taken before, because I'm a drama queen, because obviously people have taken these paths before and I wasn't on my own. But I felt like I was going against the grain and I was doing something that maybe I would regret. But when I did that, I then decided to kind of take a year out and went with my best friend to New Zealand, and we worked as SHOs, and I then went and did a bit of travelling. And that was really fun because I really realised what I wanted from my life. I didn't work out what specialty I wanted to do, which was a little bit of the point. I'd chosen some specialties that I thought I might like. But what I did realise is that I definitely didn't want to do radiology, which was a huge weight off my shoulders. But also that I wanted something, I'd still had that spark for medicine, and I wanted something that kept that spark going. So I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I came back, but I thought, well, let's do something very broad-based so I can do something after that, and therefore chose general practice. Really didn't like general practice. I found it incredibly difficult and incredibly work-heavy, very intense. I loved the hospital bits. I really didn't like the general practice bits, except the patients and my colleagues. And so I knew I wanted to do something with patients, and that's what radiology hadn't given me. So I just fell into occupational medicine. It was a complete fluke. But each way along the way, I realised something more about myself and what I wanted. And, you know, that we talked about that need to make change that sometimes in the NHS, you don't feel that you can do for red tape, or because you might feel like just a cog in a wheel, or because you're moving hospitals so much, and so you never can complete something, or, you know, for whatever reason, I felt that I really needed something like that, and fell into occupational medicine, and it ticked some of the boxes, not all of them. It doesn't sometimes fulfill my need for adrenaline, but I get those kicks in my own time by running, or, you know, bungee jumping or whatever. Those bits I get in my own time, but it fulfilled enough of what I wanted to do to be able to move forward with that.
It's great it's really inspiring to hear you say that, as somebody who's, you know, now maybe getting to fulfill a bit more of those things that they wanted in their NHS job. This idea that you said about going against the grain, I think this is what puts the fear in people. People are afraid to step out of those traditional pathways because, you know, well, what are people going to say? And, you know, what about my training? I mean, you've clearly managed to push through that fear. What would you say to people that are maybe thinking they might want to step outside medicine, but they are afraid to do it? Is there anything that you'd advise them?
Absolutely. So if I had to do it again, I would do it again. I'd still be equally scared. I mean, it's scary being outside of traditional medicine. It was scary taking on this role because it still is different. You have to make your own networks, and sometimes there isn't a pathway to follow. But there's several things I would do that weren't necessarily available when I started that journey. Is firstly, I'd find others like you, because there are lots of people like you. So Medic Footprints is a community of doctors that are forging their own paths, be it working in an unusual clinical specialty, or being an entrepreneur alongside clinical practice, or all sorts of things. Or, you know, there's somebody that's a yoga instructor and gave up medicine to be a yoga instructor. So Medic Footprints, I think, is a really good community. And the second is Alternative Careers for Medicine, which again they both can be found on Google or Facebook. And again, is set up by a chap who left general practice to do allied to medicine type specialties. I think he's set up some digital medical stuff. And again, they're filled with people who want to do something different, and they're really inspiring. But I think also the second thing is don't be too hard on yourself. It's okay to feel that you want more. I think it's important to consider what it is you want. So something like my job, it seems super cool, and people are very impressed when I say what my title is, but it's hard work. It's sometimes long hours, it's sometimes banging my head against a wall. Like anything else in medicine, it requires dedication and vocation. And so any alternative career that you want to go into, think about why. So, for example, everybody wants to be an investment banker, don't they? Everyone wants to roll around in money and, you know, drive a gold Bentley. But actually, is it going to fulfill you? Those sorts of things, you know, just being facetious to make the point. Think about what it is that you then want from your career. But also then think about, if there are people that have done it before, they're probably okay with being contacted, or look at what they've done, or look at the qualities that you need to have that job, and then start working on how you go about doing that. But don't forget, it's important then to have a safety net as well, and be realistic about what can be achieved.
So there's, you know, still long hours, but you know, are there any sort of perks on the other side that make, you know, working hard a little bit, you know, easier for you? I just wonder, in terms of the you know, those kinds of work benefits, working at the BBC. Not that we're advertising for the BBC or anything, but be interested to know a little bit about what the lifestyle's like.
Oh my God, the lifestyle. So I started working for the BBC as the first lockdown hit. So I don't think I've quite benefited from any potential lifestyle so far. But I think perks for me are several. So if we think about the kind of personal satisfaction first, I find the work very rewarding, because whilst I'm not dealing with individual patients, which also gives me a lot of joy, I do get to make change. And sometimes it is on an individual level where I can see that change, but quite often it's on a big level, which I think is incredibly satisfying. My mind, you know, my brain hurts on a daily basis because my mind is stretched. So on a professional level, I love the fact that I do have to do a lot of reading about lots of different things. I have to learn lots about how the organisation works in order to be able to influence in a way that's appropriate. But I find that very enjoyable and very stimulating. From a kind of production point of view, I work with some amazing people. You know, I have my bosses, the senior people there, the executive team, the director general, are all incredibly inspiring people. They're all incredibly successful, and they're all incredibly lovely, which is really nice. But then the obvious perks. So yes, I've been to EastEnders. I've spoken to famous members of staff. I'm not the best when it comes to celebrities, so I don't sometimes know who they are, but other people do, and I have, you know, nice stories to tell. Yes, I have been invited to go to Strictly. Yes, I am going to go down to Top Gear. There's some cool things that I get to do, and I get to see that other people wouldn't, which is a wonderful privilege.
I want to turn now to maybe talking about what the BBC gets out of having somebody like a chief medical officer. Because you bring a lot of expertise, certain medical background, certain way of doing things. How does an organisation like the BBC benefit from having a doctor in chief?
So I'm gonna speak on their behalf because obviously I'm amazing and they love me. But but I think that what in general what they would get is firstly they get somebody that can be purely an employee advocate. So I look purely at health or purely at conditions to help them make a decision. So when they are deciding on, is our COVID strategy adequate, I'm not looking at cost, I'm not looking at practicality, I'm looking at best evidence, and that's all I'm doing. So they then can make a decision based on those other things that are important to them. When I'm looking at policy, I'm looking at NICE guidelines, I'm looking at best practice clinically to help them decide on how policy is shaped, which no one else is doing. I have a network of other doctors to help benchmark what's happening in other organisations to help shape. But also, I think that any organisation would benefit from somebody with that robust integrity that comes from being a doctor, that ability to think quickly and about safety and best practice and assurance to ensure that processes are safe. So even if they're not working in a completely medical role, there's lots of the transferable skills that they also get from having a chief medical officer. So that ability to stand up to scrutiny, to be honest, to be robust, and to be confident in situations that can be shaky. They also get that as well as somebody that is not bowed by how important someone is, that is simply looking at what best practices or what is best for an individual or a group, that's not that's not curtailed by people who might be upset or angry because we're used to dealing with somebody like that, or that's not afraid to communicate openly and honestly in the face of important people. They get all sorts of clinical skills in a non-clinical environment, but also personal skills that I think us as doctors have in spades.
It reminds me of a quote, actually. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And I wonder, as the only doctor, if it sort of feels like that sometimes. You've got maybe more understanding of what the evidence is saying and more ability to put the individual at the heart of things. I'm interested to know about where what kind of information you have available to you to sort of inform those decisions. Are you having to find all of that yourself, or do you have a team of people around you? I'd be interested to know.
So yes, I'm definitely the pinnacle of the one-eyed man is king with medical knowledge. But what I would say is that I work with incredibly intelligent people who are at the forefront of the comms industry, so the news, and so therefore they also do know quite a lot. Or I think, which is in general in society at the moment, is that a little bit of information can be a good or a bad thing. So sometimes my role is helping them to interpret that information in a way that's correct, or framing that in a way that's actually how I think it is. But in terms of how I do that, or what support I have around me, so I have an amazing allied team of safety professionals who help to take some of the things that I write or say and put it in a context that's appropriate for that particular workplace. So, you know, somebody filming in Northern Scotland versus somebody that's working on a Top Gear shoot in rainy South England might be quite different. But I also have I have a team of health professionals. So I have an occupational psychologist who works more on the mental health side of things, and another specialist who helps to implement some policy and practice. So it's more than just me, but also then I think the BBC and the people I work with in HR or in editorial policy or in resilience, they're very good at then taking what I've said in the context of the way they need to apply it to their situation. So it's very much always a joint effort.
Mm-hmm. So let's say there's something that you want to change, and you know you've got the evidence sort of saying that you know this would be a good idea, and you know that you want to do that. There's a sort of decision that kind of, you know, it sounds like, you know, you have to persuade other people around you, and to do that you have to use your influence. So I want to ask you about influence on a sort of organizational scale, but then maybe also influence on an individual scale as well. You know, how do you go about trying to influence these things around you?
So, yeah, and that's something really, Zach, that I'm still learning to an extent, because every day is a school day. So I think, you know, you're right. It's influencing, it's negotiating, it's persuasion. And I think no matter what job you're doing, you know, even if it's a patient in front of you and you're trying to convince them to take a certain medication, or you're trying to give them information about an operation they really need, or, you know, a DNAR decision, it's the same sort of thing. So I think first of all is being real and being a human being, and being honest, open, upfront, and having that proven background is something that takes time. People trust you more when they know that they feel they know what you're doing. Of course, it's only natural, it's not personal, it's I do it too. So having that kind of track record of, you know, keeping your head down and doing everything, and you know, being, like, it sounds silly, but being seen to be doing those things also is always something. But I think then building those personal relationships, so it's kind of key to everything, isn't it, really? Understanding what somebody's about, understanding where they're coming from, understanding what their motivation is has got to be the way that we then work together. Because unless something is vastly unsafe, it's not a do as I say because I'm the doctor. That's not cool. It's not appropriate either. So it is a case of, well, what is it that I want to achieve? What is it that they want to achieve? And, you know, which are the bits that for me are a must-have? So sometimes when I'm putting something in place for COVID, for example, I'll have a list of nice-to-have and a list of must-haves. So, for example, temperature screening, nice to have, not necessary. Excellent ventilation, must have, non-negotiable. So those sorts of things. So kind of, you know, having that give and take. But then I think that, you know, it's an ongoing relationship, both on a individual level and on an organisational scale. It's knowing who those players are. It's knowing who makes the decisions and what makes them tick. Just like people that influence me and I don't really know about it, they're doing the same thing. They're finding out who I am, where I'm from, what makes me tick.
It's quite refreshing to have somebody say, well, it's not about this idea that you've got to know the most or be the most confident or push things through. It's about speaking to people. It's about actually having those good quality relationships. I want to come back to something you said, because you felt like this was a job where you really could make things happen on a wider level. And I feel like I want to know exactly why you feel like that. You know, what is it about this job that makes you feel like you can change things?
So I think they're very receptive is the first thing, is when you have an organisation that's receptive to change, or receptive to improvement, that's the most amazing blank canvas. I think COVID helps. People have realised, not necessarily within the BBC, but in general, I think people realise how important health is and how precious health is. But people realise that sometimes it's about the basics, washing your hands, very basic thing. I think what is mortality rate across the world for under fives? It's mainly for infectious diseases, these simple things that are still important. So I think that's the first thing is I work in an organisation that is very receptive to those ideas, which is so amazing and inspirational. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing is, and this is really what makes me tick, is we have a very big international arm in which I think there is quite a lot of room for understanding what their health systems are like, what they're like, how they live, how they work, to be able to improve things for people, which I've seen through COVID and some of the talks I've done on vaccination, for example, that filters into the community, which has actually happened in the UK as well as abroad, which I think you then think, wow, okay, they might not take up a vaccination, but they've listened to the information and they've fed back that they found it useful. And to me, that's everything. It's these small grassroots things that make a big behemoth organisation move. Has got to be top down and bottom up to stratify it. And I think that I'm in a position where I'm so lucky to be able to do both and have a motivated set of employees and their bosses that are really receptive to change, which is really cool.
So you're not regretting your decision to leave that radiology job?
I tell you what, whilst I don't regret it, I do think it would have been cool. If, I'd have loved to. I would have loved to have stuck with it. Some of the people that I worked with are doing these super cool, like, new techniques and life-changing procedures. That is awesome. There is one part of me still that would be like, yeah, I'd love to be that pioneering person. Somebody said to me when I started radiology, I bet they'll name a sign after you. That would have been very cool. I would still like to have a sign named after me. So I don't regret it, but I'm only human, so I think there's always going to be a part of me that says, well, what would that life have been? Why not? But certainly I wouldn't change this life for anything. All the pathway, all the tears and the heartache and the difficult decisions. It's all of those little things have brought me to where I am. And I think people that are having those doubts or those kind of twinges of what do I do should take heart that anything that they do or they've done so far will ultimately shape where they go and what they do going forward.
So one question that I always end on is, whether if people want to know a little bit more about what we've been talking about, is there a book that you would recommend that's maybe influenced you?
Oh God, so that's a really interesting question. There's not a lot that makes me speechless, but this is one of them. A book? No. So I tell you why. Because I take quite a lot of I read quite a lot, but not kind of how to influence and negotiate or techniques of successful people. I haven't got to that stage where I read those. I tend to read more about, at the moment I'm reading about Greek mythology and history, so I don't really have those sorts of things. I don't really watch a lot of podcasts or TED Talks. I take a lot of inspiration from the people around me. So that's, I think, for me, whilst I'm really sorry, there's no kind of high-flying book or nugget. My nugget would be...
No, that's okay.
My nugget would be take inspiration from those around you. Learn from those that are willing to give you a hand. I still am in touch with the consultant radiologist from FY1 who was a sounding post, was a real guiding light, and a really cool dude, just a really nice person. I'm still in touch with him, and I'm constantly, I can't give anything back, but he helped me so much. So take the help that is offered to you, because that's gold dust. And then when you get to a stage where you feel, yeah, I'm cool, I've reached where I want to be, don't forget to pass it back to and help other people up.
I think that's a great note to finish on. It's been an absolutely amazing conversation, Claire. Lots of really positive stuff about sort of knowing yourself and not being afraid to sort of take the jump. So thank you very much for talking to me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been awesome, Zach. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marlwaner, the director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.